Okay, let's see. Back to objectivism. I just want to drive this point home one more time, that Leonard Peikoff, who is kind of a disciple of Ayn Rand, and is responsible for a whole lot of the material that's been published about objectivism, mentions what is meant by objective reality. He says, people often speak of objective reality. In this usage, which is harmless, objective means independent of consciousness. The actual purpose of the concept, however, is to be found not in metaphysics, but in epistemology. Strictly speaking, existents are not objective, they simply are. It is minds, and specifically conceptual processes, that are objective or non-objective. That seems ass backwards to me. What he's saying is, and this is in his book titled Objectivism, is that reality isn't, I mean, the external world isn't necessarily objective, but minds are. And that makes no sense.
Well, I think he's using language. I agree that it doesn't make any sense, the second part.
Yeah.
But when he says, strictly speaking, existents are not objective, I think he's saying, now we're getting back to word usage, I think he's saying that they're not objective in the sense that they're talking about. When he says they simply are, then that goes back to the A is A thing.
Yeah, right.
Which we would agree with. A is definitely A.
A certainly is A. I have no complaint about that.
A is not A-OK. It's just A.
So, I mean, to go with a theme here, one of my central objectives, one of my central objections to objectivism is the treatment of, is the sort of declaration that everything should be objective. That not only is the physical world objective, but there are values which everybody must have, and there are no real subjective values. If there are, then it's basically the result of bad thinking that's not in line with objectivism. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit into Ayn Rand's books. Anthem is not one of her more famous books. The most famous ones are The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The Fountainhead is about a brilliant architect named Howard Rourke. This is going to be the super duper compressed summary of the book. Howard Rourke is a genius who is unrecognized by all these people, except for the very, very small number of really smart people in the world. He has this sort of guy who leeches off of his brilliance named Peter Keating, who he helps out occasionally by designing something, and then Peter Keating weasels and takes the credit for it.
Wait, does he get popular and put out an album that people then call too commercial?
What?
He's sold out? Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Who, Peter Keating or Howard Rourke, the brilliant
Rourke, the unrecognized genius.
Howard Rourke stays true to his ideals right through the end, where he delivers this long speech in front of a courtroom where he's accused of blowing up one of his own buildings to make a statement. And they just let him talk, which is kind of a theme in Ayn Rand, that at the end, the brilliant noble hero has to be able to talk for a long time uninterrupted and serve as a mouthpiece for the author. Meanwhile, there's this interesting villain in Ayn Rand's book named Ellsworth Toohey, who kind of exemplifies everything that's wrong in the Ayn Rand universe, which is, well, earlier I mentioned that one of her fundamental principles is that man must not sacrifice himself to other people. In fact, if I can skip ahead to Atlas Shrugged for just a second, one of the characters in Atlas Shrugged swears the following oath: "I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another human being or ask another human being to live for mine." In fact, she even has a cute little name which pops up repeatedly in her work. She calls those people second-handers. This is a very bad insult if you're talking to a Rand person. Anyway, I pulled a little bit of discussion about Ellsworth Toohey, who's effectively the villain of The Fountainhead, because one of the things that comes up also a lot in Ayn Rand is that to be selfless is a vice and not a virtue. To be altruistic is used as a pejorative constantly in Ayn Rand's literature, which is weird if you're talking about objectivity, because just a few months ago I actually did that. I mean, if you're the scientific type who's into evolution, a few months ago I did a show about altruism where I talked a lot about game theory and demonstrated that yes, in fact, altruistic behavior is something that naturally arises out of competitive drive to propagate the species. And you can go back and listen to that in the archive if you're interested. But anyway, because it's so awful to be altruistic in the Ayn Rand universe, here's a description of Ellsworth Toohey from something that's linked on the blog. This guy writes, "The one bad lapse in the long speech in which Ellsworth Toohey lays bare his own motives." This is where he's doing his "mwahaha, I'm really a villain all along." Let's see. Rand had put herself in an impossible position with her ethical theory. For Ayn Rand, a villain must be a completely self-sacrificing person. Toohey is an intelligent villain who wants power. And throughout the book, as a side note, he's always talking about how wonderful it is to put people on welfare and to be selfless and live for others, and it's the highest virtue. So he's a real bad guy. Toohey is an intelligent villain who wants power, but somehow it has to come across that in wanting power, he's not being selfish, because that would be virtuous. If Toohey had been dedicated to a mistaken ideal based on the theory that everyone would be happier in a world of self-sacrifice, it would be convincing. But then we would have no reason to hate him. If Toohey had known that universal self-sacrifice would lead to universal misery, but wanted it for the selfish motive of getting power for himself, this would be detestable, but then it would be dangerous to Rand's egoistic message. So Toohey has to want to do his bit towards a goal which, it is made clear in the end, can only arrive after his death, so he looks selfless, and to know that the goal will make everyone else completely wretched, and to want it for that reason. But that just makes him unbelievably loony. And then he doesn't have any plausible links to real people like Lewis Mumford and Harold Lasky, who were supposedly Rand's models for Toohey. Toohey's villainy comes from the fact that in the end he's really going to hurt people, but that's not altruistic. That's just weird. Anyway.
Well, this thing, here's where I start to see like internal conflicts with this this idea that comes out, perhaps not explicitly in opposition to altruism, but certainly implicitly in opposition to it, and yet advocates self-interest in seeking personal happiness.
Right.
If in fact you were to look at more of a what's best for me worldview, then I don't think we'd have people teaching.
Right.
Because you've gained some knowledge, and why would you then accept substandard pay and conditions to teach when you could use that knowledge in order to earn? And especially if you have specialized knowledge. This philosophy seems to promote the idea of specialized knowledge to help each individual rather than community knowledge that would help the society as a whole and thereby help each individual.
Right. In fact, from what I've gathered from a lot of reading Rand's books, a big characteristic of evil people in the Rand universe is that they do something without a profit motive.
Well, the kind of contradiction that I was actually getting to was, yet Ayn herself, I don't know why I keep calling her Anne, I know it's Ayn. I'm sure we'll get somebody to call me stupid for it. Ayn herself is doing that. Yes, okay, she wrote a book and she made money for it, but there's no guarantee that she's going to get profits from it. She is teaching people her particular philosophy. And if it is somehow okay for her to do that, or for someone to teach and make some profit rather than use that knowledge and make more profit, If their personal happiness, if they derive happiness from teaching, if they derive happiness from sharing this information, then one can also derive happiness from truly altruistic acts. And therefore, if I'm working towards my own self-interest that includes my happiness, then altruism can't be written off as a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I believe that actually doing something selfless or seemingly selfless can give you enough pleasure without an actual profit motive. I mean, I'm basically a hedonist, I guess I would have to say. I mean, I believe that ultimately every one of us does stuff because we feel that we will be happier for having done it.
Well, in general, I think I think you're going to find exceptions to everything else. Okay. There are times when I have done something that I'd rather not do, that I wasn't particularly happy about doing. That I wasn't even convinced I'd get any kind of long-term returns out of in order to help someone else out. Maybe it made me feel good at the time, maybe it didn't.
But you wanted that person to be happy. That's kind of my point.
I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case all the time.
Okay.
I think that the complexity of why we do what we do is so great. And I think this is one of my biggest objectives to objectivism, is that it seems to be an oversimplification. Even with regard to epistemology, there's this really rigid idea of know as in knowledge. And Ein came out against, of course, I'm not taking this personally, but one of my greatest heroes being David Hume. She was in opposition to the empiricist and the people who advocated philosophical skepticism. And I have a problem with that, as I happen to agree with them for the most part.
I realize we've got callers backing up, but I really want to get through the fiction section of this. So I'm going to get to the book I brought in substitute of the Bible today, Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged, I'm also going to do a super compressed summary of. Basically...
Good, because that's a long-ass book.
It is a long book. By the way, Atlas Shrugged is now being made into a movie with Angelina Jolie in the starring role as Dagny Taggart. And that's going to be interesting. I'm going to watch it. At the same time, I really hope that they cut John Galt's speech by a lot, because the speech in this edition of the book right here, I wrote this down somewhere. Oh yes, it starts on page 923 and ends at page 979, making a total of 56 pages in which Galt just talks and talks and doesn't shut up.
If you're an objectivist, you can never call in and complain about me being long-winded again.
Now, I believe Martin, who's who's into the entertainment business, told me that I forget if it's 2 or 3 minutes of screen time per page, but if you just let the whoever plays John Galt talk for all that time, you would have an entire movie out of the way before you could actually get to any of the plot.
Nice. Oh, as a reminder, since they popped it up on the screen, when this program's over with, we go to dinner at Threadgill's on Riverside. There's the address at the bottom of the screen. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come to that, as well as any of our other events. If you're coming down to preach, proselytize, provoke, please don't. You can pick up the phone and call, or you can email tv@atheist-community.org.
Yes. Okay, so I'm sorry, but if you haven't read this book when it's been out for like 60 years, too bad, you're getting spoilers. It's, as one site put it, about 10 minutes in the future of when Ayn Rand was writing. So it's sort of a bleak near future world where the world is completely run by stupid people. I mean, that's pretty much the way to sum it up. There are a very small number of brilliant, noble people left in the world, one of them being Angelina Jolie, who is also hot. But then we've also got...
And an atheist.
Oh, yeah, right. Then we've got this mysterious figure known as John Galt, who's spoken as sort of a catchphrase throughout the book. And we've got some other people like Hank Rearden. They're all brilliant inventors and businessmen and people who get shit done. Oh, excuse me. I guess we can say that now, but okay. They're the kind of people who get stuff done, and there's all these second-handers in the book who want to leech off their ideas and get the benefit of them without working. And then what happens is, here's the spoilers, John Galt runs away from society and basically takes all his cool toys with him, founds this hidden society in the middle of nowhere, and then starts convincing all the geniuses in the world to run away with him and go basically do what I said before, which is create an experimental version of a libertarian utopia. All the smart people in the world run away and they make their own little society, and the world gets to be in worse and worse shape, but that's okay because they all deserve it, because the vast, vast, vast majority of the world are stupid. And here's where we start to get into something that I'm also a little bit bothered by in Ayn Rand's philosophy, which is that anytime you have a philosophy which doesn't attempt to understand the way people think, but instead sort of makes these sweeping blanket statements about how all people are morons and deserve what they get, you're bordering on Wonko the Sane in Douglas Adams' books. Wonko the Sane was this character at the end of, I think it was The Life, the Universe, and Everything, who declared that everybody in the universe was crazy except for him. So he built an asylum to keep the world in. He built an inside-out house, and he said, I live here, outside the asylum. and you know, this character is clearly nuts. But this is a characteristic of cults, that they cut themselves off from the rest of the world. They declare that there's this chosen few who are way smarter or way more deserving than everyone else. And if you don't think that Ayn Rand does this, I actually brought a passage to read today. I'm only going to read excerpts from it. But basically there's a sequence with a train wreck. And what comes about, this happens about halfway through the book, and it's basically shown to be the natural consequence of all the stupid people who are dragging the geniuses down. And, you know, obviously a train is filled with random people who are just going about their lives. And so Ayn Rand sets up a train wreck, which is a result of all this bad stuff that people have done. But then she goes out of her way to make sure you know that every single random stranger on the train deserved it. It is said that catastrophes are a matter of pure chance, and there were those who would have said that the passengers of the comet were not guilty or responsible for the thing that happened to them. The thing that happened to them being everybody's about to die. The man in bedroom A, car number 1, was a professor of sociology who taught that individual ability is of no consequence, that individual effort is futile, that an individual conscience is a useless luxury, that there is no individual mind or character or achievement, that everything is achieved collectively, and that it's masses that count, not men. The man in roomette 7, car number 2, was a journalist who wrote that it is proper and moral to use compulsion for a good cause, who believed that he had the right to unleash physical force upon others, to wreck lives, throttle ambitions, strangle desires, violate convictions, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, there's like 3 pages of this where she goes through like various parts of the car and just says, here's the guy who was living, who was riding there, and boy, did he have some bad ideas.
It reminds me a little bit of putting public figures under the microscope.
Yes.
Where you could find something wrong with anybody that almost everybody would see as a flaw, because we are in fact all flawed.
Right. Anyway, she goes through all these different passengers and then concludes with, these passengers were awake, but there was not a man aboard the train who did not share one or more of their ideas. And as the train went into the tunnel, the flame of Wyatt's torch was the last thing they saw on Earth. Now, the impression I get from this passage, I don't know about you, is, boy, did all these people have it coming. That creeps me out. That she would set up all these strangers and take such obvious glee and delight in how much they deserve to die.
Yeah, and you know, this promotion of oligarchical ideas where the intelligent are the ones who rule, or these separatist societies where we've taken all the geniuses off, having not read Atlas Shrugged, and I have no idea how John Galt's little experiment worked out.
Oh, of course.
I'm wondering.
He took over the world.
I'm wondering who was doing the cooking and cleaning, and the manufacturing, the policing. Who was doing the daily things that these geniuses and super intellects probably weren't very well suited to do?
A friend of mine, I talked to him on the phone before this show, and he said, and he kind of likes Rand, but he said there's really three classes of people that, and you're not acknowledging the third one. One of them is the second-handers. One of them is the geniuses. And then there are people who just sort of hang out with the geniuses, and they're not really brilliant themselves, but they're useful enough that like Dagny has an assistant in this book, and he's okay. He's treated as a good guy. So I wouldn't say that he completely discounts the cooks and the people who cook and clean, but Anyway, I think I'm doing a John Galt and just talking to hear myself for a long time. So I think I'll give somebody else a turn on the phone line before I get to a little more.
Okie doke.